It all started with a trip to the bar. Some friends had invited me out after work for drinks. Given that we all work at the steel mill in this two-stoplight rural town, that meant we were going to Dusty's. Dusty's is what's colloquially called a dive bar, but it's the only bar we have in town. It's a little roadhouse where you can drink watered-down beer, listen to country music, put some money in the jukebox, play some pool, or hit on the 7 or 8 half-dead barflies that are there every night. If you go to Dusty's for the atmosphere, then you're going to be disappointed. Most of us went there to watch the guys who worked for the town's only other reliable business, the logging company, drink too much and get in fights with people that are unprepared to stand toe-to-toe with them. That night in question was what you would call a slow night. I'd had about 3 pitchers of cheap beer, and the only fight we had seen was when someone's wife came in to drag him away from whatever tart he was talking to by the stage. Neither of them had been particularly skillful brawlers, and when they finally decided to just beat the crap out of her husband and drag him out of the parking lot, I told the guys I was going to turn in early. It was creeping up on midnight, and the bar was deader than usual. Dude, no way you're going to get a cab this late at night. You might as well stick around. Why wouldn't I be able to get a cab? Sandy's runs till 3 in the morning most nights. Charlie, the guy who had told me I wouldn't get a cab, leaned back on his stool so he could look at me. My cousin Dwayne says the cabs won't come out this far after 10 o'clock. They've been having trouble with people going missing. I rolled my eyes, walking my stool back so I didn't fall off of it. I was drunker than I thought I had been, and I didn't want to fall over in front of my friends. Yeah, I've been hearing those stories since I was a kid. Tell your cousin not to believe everything he reads on the internet. I took a staggering step towards the door, catching the bar with my hand as the room spun a little. Nah, Charlie protested. This is pretty recent. They say that the cabs have been arriving to pick up fares, but when they get there, no one is waiting. It's a big mystery, and no one's really sure what to think of it. I scoffed at him, not really in the mood for any of that. I staggered out of Dusty's, taking out my cell phone as I tried to Google the number for Sandy's. I'd used it often enough that you'd think I could remember it, but in my current state, I couldn't remember much of anything. After 2 or 3 failed attempts, I managed to get the number in and got the receptionist after 3 long rings. Sandy's Cabs, how can I help you? Yeah, I need to get a cab from Dusty's bar. I'd heard the clicking of keys on the other end of the phone, but when she learned my location, she seemed to change her mind. I'm sorry, sir, we don't pick up from Dusty's anymore. I glowered at the phone, not quite sure I had heard her right. What kind of small-town cab company doesn't pick up from the biggest bar in town? How come? I asked. It was deemed too detrimental to our clients. I guess Charlie had been right. Okay, well, where can I catch a cab? There was some furious clicking, and when she came back, she almost seemed to be whispering, as if something might hear her. There's a bus stop down by Richmond. The company has said that it's the closest to Dusty's that will pick up clients. Richmond? It's almost 5 blocks from here. Sorry, sir. If you want a cab, then that's where you'll have to go. I considered just going back inside to wait for the others, but decided I was ready to leave. A walk would probably do me some good anyway. Fine. I'll meet them there in 30 minutes. The dispatcher said that she would dispatch a cab, and then promptly hung up on me. With that out of the way, I began my walk along the shoulder of the rural road. Fortunately, the weather was pretty good for early June. The pine trees on the left side of the road, side I was walking on, made a skittering sound in the wind, and it sent a chill down my spine. The thick swab of pulpwood trees seemed to stretch on for miles, and the farther I walked, the more it felt like something was watching me. It was little more than a tickle on the side of my face, the slight attention of something that I couldn't really see, but the farther I went, the more the regard rankled me. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was just feeling creeped out after a long walk in the middle of the night. But I heard the pine needles crunching lightly beneath something, and decided to speed up. I tried to convince myself it was just a deer or a fox that I had disturbed up, and it would leave off after it got a sniff of me. They were more afraid of me than I was of them, and once they realized it, they'd take off. The farther I walked, though, the more I thought about the disappearance that Charlie had talked about. I wasn't much for news. I didn't even have a cable subscription, but I was shocked that I hadn't heard anything about these kidnappings or whatever they were. The thought that there might be something watching me from the woods with intentions of making me its next victim made me speed up a little more. I had to stop myself from running as I ate up the road. What would I do when I got to the bus stop if there was no cab there? Would I really be able to just sit in the terminal and wait while whatever was out there kept watching me? I shook the feeling off, feeling silly. It's just a raccoon or a possum or something. Just because it seemed to be going in the same direction I was didn't necessarily mean it had ill intentions. I tried to ignore the soft sound of indignant pine needles as they broke underfoot, but the farther we went, the harder it became. It was just an animal, I told myself. I had just disturbed it in whatever had brought it out tonight, and now it was curious of me. It would go on its way soon. It would leave me alone if I just ignored it. I kept telling myself that, but the further I went, the harder it was to believe. It seemed to be stalking me from beyond the dark forest, a predator intent on man-flesh. It looked like some kind of hunting cat, its head boxy and its body sleek and long. It slunk quietly along behind me, plotting its attack as it prepared to spring. That was stupid, I told myself. There was nothing there. I was just making myself paranoid. I was imagining the sound of large, flat paws on pine falls. I was creating the slightly elevated breathing of the animal. If I turned now, I wouldn't see anything but the shadows and the pine trees. I tried to make my head turn, but my neck seemed unwilling. I remembered something that my grandma had said once when I was a kid, and her voice rustled through my mind like a ghost. Some things don't like being seen, and when you see them, you can't take it back. When I saw the lights of the bus stop, I almost broke into a run. I made myself walk, however, because things like that love to chase, too. As I got closer to the bus stop, I became aware of someone sitting in the lighted shell. As I got closer, I could see it was a woman, her head down and her body abnormally still. I wanted to call out to her to warn her about the thing that was following me, but as I moved closer to the stop, I realized it had broken off its chase at some point. I breathed a sigh of relief, laughing at myself for psyching myself up. It had all been in my head after all, and I had never really been in any danger. As I came into the light of the bus stop, I almost laughed, my smile hard to hide. "Something funny?" asked the woman, lifting her head to look at me. My smile soured a little. Her voice sounded strange in the bus shell, and I worried that I might have offended her. "Nah, it's just I was worried about something, and it appears to have all been in my head. I was mostly laughing at myself for being foolish." I realized now that I was here that she was sitting with her knees against her face, and she had leaned her head against her knees as she turned to look at me. She was a stringy thing, older teens or early 20s, and her hair looked oily as it hung about her face like filthy drapes in a rundown trailer. She was dressed in something that had once been a sack or maybe curtains, and I wondered if she might be homeless. Worst of all, she had a smell about her, a smell that was not altogether pleasant, a smell that reminded me of my grandfather's smokehouse after hunting season, of the remains of animals left behind that smokehouse. "What was it?" she asked, her teeth looking too big in her mouth as she smiled. I was afraid of being stalked by some kind of hunting cat," I said, surprising myself by speaking at all. "A cat? In this part of the world?" She scooted a little closer to me, a minute movement, but too much for me. This part of the world is more accustomed to bears, I hear," she said. As she scooted this time, I scooted away. Like I said, it was just just a feeling." "What kind of feeling?" she asked, scooting again, though I couldn't figure out how. Her arms were around her legs, her knees against her cheek, and she seemed to have no means of scooting at all. It was," I stuttered, my mouth suddenly very dry. "It was like being Red Riding Hood while the wolf stalked her." At that moment, I was as sober as I had ever been. Between the creature and the girl, all the drink had been burned out of me, and I suddenly wondered if the creature might have left because it smelled her. Her smile threatened to cut her cheeks. "I imagine that was exhilarating. Did you enjoy feeling like the prey for once? Did your blood demand that you run, but your mind insisted that walking would be safer? Did you know how much I wanted to chase you?" My heart was pounding, loud enough for me to hear it. She had just admitted to being the one that was stalking me. She couldn't have been the thing in the woods. There was no way. She had been here when I arrived. There was no way she could have dogged my heels through the woods and then gotten here before me. It was impossible. My brain told me these things, but I found it harder and harder to believe as she slowly backed me into the side of the bus shell. I wanted to run, but I knew that was what she wanted too. "You thought you'd be safe once you made it to the light, didn't you, manling? Little did you know that monsters don't always shrivel in the light." She was very close now, her legs coming down as she unfurled herself. She was bigger than I had thought, her body thin and long as she pulled herself onto the bench. She was on all fours, that grin very disconcerting as it came closer. She was feral looking, some wild woman from the depths of a dark jungle. As she prepared to spring, I saw a pair of headlights pin her to the spot as they approached us. I did run then. I ran from the bench and threw myself into the cab, telling the man to drive before the door was even shut. He looked confused, turning back to the girl as if to ask if she needed a ride too, but his confusion didn't last. The color drained from his face as he got a look at her, and he yelled for me to close the door. He pulled off with a squeal of tires, and we both watched the woman as we drove away, her smiling face getting smaller as she watched us. I leaned against the seat, panting as I tried to control my galloping heart. He had to try a couple of times before I could hear him over the blood pounding in my ears, and when I finally made sense of it, we were turning around to get back on the route. "You got very lucky, fella. More lucky than you know." I asked him why I thought so, and he told me a story I'll never forget. "A couple of nights ago, I got a call to that same bus stop to pick up a fare. Dispatch said he sounded weird when he called, like he'd been running, but his car had broke down near the stop, so he figured he had just been pissed off about his luck. I pulled up about 20 minutes later and found not a middle-aged man fuming over his car, but that same girl with the Cheshire Cat grin on her face. She looked up at me as I came to stop, and I just knew that if I got out of my cab, they'd never find me again. The area near Dusty's is supposed to be off limits, and after tonight, I don't think Sandy's will be picking up out here until the situation changes." I've been sitting in my living room, hands shaking as I write this, but unsure of what to do now. I called Charlie before I got into my apartment, but I don't think they really believed me. Charlie was pretty drunk and sounded like he thought I was making fun of him. I hope they make it home safe, but it's that dangerous smile that I can't get out of my mind. She's out there somewhere, waiting for her next victim, and I feel very fortunate to be able to tell you my story and not be a squib in tomorrow's paper. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad, Unicorn Hollow, and Heather for being our Spooky Ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, Sue Casper, and Valinator for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributors. And thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, and Sarah Samar 42 for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you too would like to support the show, we always tell you to come on down to Patreon or check out my member section on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton contributors get their video 12 hours earlier at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. And Ghostly Readers get a book every time I write one on their doorstep. There's actually one coming up here in a few weeks, so if you'd like to get in on that, please go ahead and sign up. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.